So I'm going to go over the 9.5 bonus balance changes to the latest patch. These notes will go live, I believe, on March 31st, or March 31st, May 31st. March has passed a little bit, everybody. So anyways, yeah, they're going to go live on May 31st, so this upcoming Tuesday. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what's been going on with 9.5 as a whole and how these changes in the bonus balance will affect it. So 9.5 as a whole, huge shakeup to the game, probably the biggest patch in history. Definitely up there, if not the biggest. And we've seen a lot of mixed opinions on are warriors dead, are warriors, where the change is justified, how OP are hunters, if they're OP at all, and sort of figuring out how everything falls. We're only a couple weeks into it, so people still have mixed opinions. We definitely have not figured everything out. I would say, on average, hunters are probably the most dominant class in ranked, at least. I think most people would echo that sentiment, and I think a lot of tank players feel like they're not that tanky. They don't do that much damage outside of the early game. So, yeah, I think coming into this bonus balance with those things in mind, kind of see, does how the community perceive the game match up with how the devs perceive the game, and just go through that. So ranked reset, this just looks like a bug. Wait, they're doing another ranked reset. Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay, so they're ranked resetting again, and they're resetting the win-loss. Okay, whatever, guess it's time to troll ranked for a couple days. Play again bug, sure. I really only care about Conquest, to be honest. These are just some general notes. So, that's the first bounce update after the 9.5 time to kill changes. A lot has changed in the game and things feel very different. There are, of course, a few specific balance outliers, blah, blah. I guess you guys can just pause this if you want to read it. Generally, it just seems to be that games are going longer. The average game length is longer. Kills have decreased, but not much. Only 6% compared to 3 minutes longer, which, 15% increase in time versus 6% kill drop. Not really that crazy. And just going to move down. Like I said, you guys can pause if you want to read that. So generally, they're decreasing how hard camps hit you, specifically red buff. I think I've seen a lot of people dying to red buff, so that makes sense, or at least getting very low. This should feel a lot better for mages and help them out in the mid lane a little bit more. Gold Fury, this will help supports, tank it, just every single Gold Fury, right? It'll do less damage to you, it won't slam you as hard, and the scaling is going to be a little bit lower, so once you actually get defense online, you won't feel like you're just getting pounded by Gold Fury quite as much. The little channel attack will always do a lot, but the rest of it not that crazy. Something that's been talked about a lot is the towers changes in this patch, the actual damage that happens to the person tanking the tower when you're sieging. You've seen a lot of people talk about Emperor's Armor and how that might be a little bit more core given the tower changes. This should help out a lot. The base power on these towers is higher, but the percent pen is reduced. So what this will mean is that I believe the actual damage you take early game for tanking a tower shot is actually going to increase just a little bit. But the pen is going to go down. Maybe it's about even given your base procs. It's only 10%. It'll be very, very, very close. But generally speaking, especially the tanks, they shouldn't be getting owned by towers as hard. So this should help you siege a little bit more and help you close out games. The biggest thing to talk about here, though, is the tier 1 tower gold reward. This is actually pretty huge. So right now, towers really just aren't worth that much. They're worth less than pretty much every other objective in the map, right? Pyro, all that. What it gives you is map pressure, right? So if you take the enemy's mid lane tower, it kind of frees up the mid lane, and it makes their mid laner a little more cautious to step up halfway up the lane, because they can be ganked so much more easily. They can be chased down all the way to their tier 2. It kind of just removes like a safety net. But now the gold will actually be really impactful, where if you're dominating the laning phase, you might not be able to kill people the same way you used to on 9.4, but you'll actually be able to kind of poke at their tower, and once you do get it, it's actually quite a sizable advantage. Like, it's nearly doubling the reward you get per person from this. I think this is actually a really significant change, and it should make pressuring lanes and kind of winning lane matchups a lot more important, even if you don't kill people. And I think that'll feel really good, especially in a lane like solo lane or duo, where you can be left alone for a while and you might feel like you're not as impactful because you're not roaming. This will kind of give you something to play through for your lane, and tower pushers will just be a little bit better because of that. They're just also adjusting the towers in other game modes, nothing too crazy. They're just keeping it consistent. Now here is the real bonus patch. So Warrior mains compromised most of the negative feedback for the 9.5 update, and we saw that discomfort reflected in the data as well. Warriors clearly dropped in win percentage, and Hunters clearly rose. So this pretty much just validates, hey, what's up, Cat? This just pretty much validates, hey, buddy, what we've been talking about, where Warriors and tanks in general, especially in the solo lane, don't really feel that great, and Hunters as a class are just a little bit overpowered. These two classes tend to offset each other, so every Warrior buff is a Hunter nerf and vice versa. We try to focus only on the most specific things to adjust for the classes to bring them back closer. For Warriors, we look to buff their early mid-game damage, blah, blah. Again, you can read it if you want. So I'm just going to talk about this from a pro player perspective, right? I think the key here is that the two classes are very, very linked, and they offset each other. Generally, the Warrior is the main person who is going to dive and threaten the enemy ADC. Yes, the jungler or the assassin might end up killing them, but the jungler doing it alone, it's very, very easy for the hunter to use their Aegis or their beads and turn on the assassin and kill them because they're so squishy. You really need somebody to open up that space, and it's not reliable for a guardian or a support to do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, they also have an obligation to kind of peel their backline and protect their backline from the same dive. And they're also generally going to be behind in level, so they can't tank the damage that the enemy backline can put out onto them. They're just not really building or playing in a way that you can really do that on a consistent basis. If your support gets ahead, they can do that, but it's not that reliable. So when we talk about Hunters being OP in this patch, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, because they just one-shot everybody. They do kind of, but a big reason is they're not threatened. Like, a Warrior is not getting ahead in solo lane just because of the way the laning phase works. It's really hard to bully people out and kill them because you just take longer to do everything if you're building full tank solo laner like you maybe would on 9.4. It takes you longer to clear, it's harder to kill other people. If you don't have damage built in your build, you're not going to kill a hunter who has an extra few hundred health. It's as if they've gotten a whole extra defense item from the last patch, and it was pretty tough to solo them before, and it would just be even harder now. And when that happens, hunters get to just sit on you and just keep auto-attacking without Aegising, and then they don't have to worry about the solo kill potential as much, and they can just lifesteal off of you, and it's really, really hard to deal with that if you're a warrior. So, in my opinion, that was the most broken thing about Hunters, was that they weren't threatened by damage, not necessarily how much damage they were doing or how tanky the tanks are. Every tank is going to get to a point in the late game where you can kill them. That's why you build Percent Pen and Kins and Soul Reaver and all these other items. You should get to that point eventually. It's really a matter of the warrior being able to threaten a kill on the hunter. So the first change is Glad Shield passive bonus now applies at all HP percentages, not just under 60, and increases the bonus damage scaled from protections from 25 to 35%. This is the biggest change in the bonus balance. It's not even close. This is basically saying warriors were pretty much screwed. They were really, really bad on 9.5. We're going to give them a core item. This is a core item. Every single warrior will build this item. This is probably going to be seen on junglers as well. I think it might even shift the jungle meta because it's just going to be a really, really good bruiser item. The stats on Gladiator Shield are actually quite good. It's a good bit of health. It's a good bit of physical prot and power, I believe. Like, the actual balance on it, or the actual stats on it, are pretty good. And it gives you CDR. I don't know if it gives you health and prot. It might just be one or the other. I don't remember exactly. I haven't built the item in forever. But the passive is the big deal. The actual passive itself does quite a lot of damage once you get to that threshold. But now that's active all the time, it's going to really help your laning phase. This probably be the item you rush, and it'll just make it so that all of these poke trades that you're taking are just going to be a lot more in your favor. You're going to feel way more threatening to the enemy jungler early game, specifically if you were to go like invade an enemy blue buff, or if they ganked you, you might have a little bit more turn potential. And then of course it's just more damage on the squishies when you dive them. It's kind of just going to be a nuts item. I think this will completely dictate what warriors you play. In a way, it's a slight nerf to auto attack warriors. Like if you think about something like Bellona, she's not really a character that you would think of wanting to use Gladiator Shield. You would think of her more as like a Berserker Shield type of character. Whereas like maybe a god like Osiris could kind of do both. I think this will be pretty pick defining. You'll pick characters that spam the Gladiator Shield proc and can use it very often and poke efficiently with it. Off the top of my head, characters like Wukong, Osiris can kind of do both. Arthur is an obvious one, right? These type of characters that just have a ton of abilities to cycle through and can just keep poking you over and over and over. This will help them a lot. The Blackthorne Hammer change, just 10 more power. I'm kind of a Blackthorne Hammer hater. I'm not that high on this item. I think it's really good on a character like Guan Yu, where the mana and the cooldown mechanic might actually help you, where you can get value out of both ends of it. But I think for the most part, there's just better items to build, like the item above it. It's a fine item. I don't think it's nearly as potent as Gladiator Shield, but it's just a small adjustment to help warriors, give them another option, just another bruiser item. Breastplate Valor, you're just going to see this at every rank. These are just both the glyphs and the base version. Just 10 more prots. This is actually a revert from, I believe, 9.4. Maybe it was 9.3 bonus, something like that, a couple months ago. They just took 10 prots off it. They're just putting it back. Nothing crazy. I think from a support perspective, this feels pretty good, because if you do want to value these glyphs, you feel a little bit tankier, and it doesn't feel like an underwhelming power spike. It'll feel a little bit better again. And then, of course, if your warrior is just a little bit more prot, just trying to tweak warriors a little bit and make them a bit better. This applies to all classes, though, too. Like, if you imagine people have built this on, like, Helm Mid, for example. Breastplate's just a good item. This just helps buff it a little bit. I don't know if this will have any ramifications, like, oh, maybe it'll feel way better for mid laners or something like that. Maybe you'll see it against very heavy physical comps. But for the most part, it's just nothing crazy. It is 10 prots. Spectral's a big one. There's been a lot of discussion over crit being really OP and Spectral not feeling very good. If you guys remember, I believe I want to say it was like 9.2 or 9.3, shortly after Season 9 released. The Spectral Armor was nerfed pretty significantly to this point. And right now, if you're a tank, it really doesn't feel great to build Spectral. You still die to crits. Like, I'll just give an example. I've played games where I have Spectral Armor and like Lono's Mask on like a mage or something like that, and I get crit for like 600 in auto, 500 in auto, even through all of the Lono's passive and the Spectral Armor. Crit is just a little bit overpowered right now, just a little bit. So Spectral is just going to make you feel a little bit better for counter building in that way. I don't know how I feel about this change. I'm a bit of a Spectral Armor hater, only in the sense that I think it's a bit of an unhealthy item. It's one where the enemy hunter will build crit, and when they see this item, they feel like their build is less rewarding, it's less satisfying, and for tanks, it's not really a fun item to build. Like, it's a counter building item, but it's not really one that changes the way you play the game, and ends up just feeling mandatory because people are going crit, and a lot of people will go crit every single game. So it definitely helps tanks. I think it'll help support a lot, especially in the late game. I think it'll make support players feel a little bit better because they don't just get shredded by the enemy ADC. But I have my eye on this change as one that I think might not actually be that great of an idea, but we'll see. And then Nemean, increased damage mitigation on a blocked auto attack from 50 to 65. This might be a hot take. In my opinion, as long as this item is not 100%, I think it's a bad item. I don't think there's a reason to really build this over Spectral, or over, the breastplate glyph, or over whatever else. It's not awful, but the problem is it's just so conditional. Like, the max is 3 stacks. You have to build pretty much full tank to get those 3 stacks for 1. They have to regenerate, or to stack up before a fight anyway, so it's another condition for it to be met. And then, yes, it's strong through 3 auto attacks, but those 3 auto attacks could come from anywhere. Their support could auto attack you and take 1 off. Their mage could auto you and take 1 off, and those auto attacks might not be worth that much. It's just inconsistent. There's going to be characters where it's obviously really good against them, but the main value of Nemean was getting the full block stack, because it would deny procs, right? It would deny the Wind Demon proc, it would deny an Envenom Deathbringer proc, it would deny a Hydra's proc, Poly proc, whatever it is. That was really the value of this item when you built it, and with that not being there, I think as long as this item isn't at 100% blocked auto attack, I think you have better options available to you. There might be cases where that's wrong, or maybe there's certain counter building. But purely from a tank perspective, I think you have better options to look at. You're going to get hit by way too many auto attacks for you to guaranteed get a ton of value out of this. Next is Gilded Arrow. Now, if you were to poll the pro players, we're getting on to ADC nerfs now. That was all the tank changes above. These are ADC nerfs. If you were to ask a majority of pro players, they would give you the feedback to change two things on this patch. The first one would be a nerf to Gilded Arrow. The reason for that being with a slower laning phase, you don't really need an item like Death's Toll or an item like Cal to kind of fight for pressure. You're better off playing for like a Gilded Arrow because the game generally is a little bit slower and goes a little bit longer. So you're getting more value out of the procs. And on top of that, you're just going to crit build every game. So the Ornate Arrow upgrade is just your preferred crit upgrade to have. And then that gives you more gold as well. So generally the reason for the Gilded nerf is that Hunters, their build is really strong late game. For me personally, that's not a concern. I want Hunters to be very, very good in the late game. I think they should be the dominant class in the late game stage. The issue is how fast they get there, and having a gold scaling item just helps them get there way quicker than every other role in the game. In my opinion, I would have taken gold off of this item completely. I think gold spooling doesn't belong in the game outside of the support role. I think that it just has a chance to be problematic in the long run. 3 gold is really not that much. I think you'll see Hunters experiment with going Death Toll, with going Cal, with going other items. But generally speaking, just my own personal perspective, I don't really think this item needs gold spooling at all. I think it could, be healthier to have a different version in the future. But for now, this is a good change. And the other nerf I would be expecting is some sort of Deathbringer nerf. I forgot to say the second change, but the other one would be Deathbringer. I think specifically the Envenomed glyph. Hunters having good crit late game is fine, but when they also are reducing your damage and slowing you, it feels very oppressive to be a frontliner into that. It basically feels like if you get crit once, you're trapped and can't kill them. And that is just not really a great feeling to have from the class that's already doing the most DPS in the game. So that would be the other nerf that the pro players would want, is Gilded nerf, Deathbringer nerf. I'd be fine with only those two and nothing else. Literally nothing else, I'd be fine with that. But there's also been a nerf to Spiked Gauntlet and Dev's Gauntlet. This is just keeping the lifesteal consistent at a tier 1, 2, and now 3. Decrease lifesteal from 15 to 10% and decrease lifesteal per stack from 0.3 to 0.2%. So now it's from 15% to 10. So Dev Gauntlets went from 30% lifesteal to 20% lifesteal. That is a massive nerf. A massive nerf. I personally do not like this change at all. And there's a few reasons for that. The first one is I think Dev's Gauntlet is actually a very fair item for Hunters to have. It's an item that just takes a little bit of time to stack, just a few minutes. It's very, very weak in the early game when it's unstacked. And it kind of fits, in my opinion, the archetype of Hunters being these late game scalers. They're choosing to go an item that is really weak, and then they scale into it, and that's very strong. I do think Dev's Gauntlet is slightly overpowered, but this nerf is really, really extreme, especially in conjunction with all of the other changes we're seeing. It's just a lot, and I think the base version especially feels pretty bad. I would have preferred, if they wanted to nerf it, to just keep the base version the same, because the power spike when you first buy this item with no stacks and you walk out of base is already quite weak. They made the stacks come to you quicker, right? It's only 50, it used to be 75. If you want to nerf it by 5% on the stacking mechanic, I think that's fine. 25% lifesteal, I wouldn't be that upset about, but 20% lifesteal is really not that great. I find it hard to believe that you would want to go this item over something like Atalana's or over something like Aussie. Maybe you will. But yeah, I think the lifesteal option for Hunters just really got shot a lot. I think between the Dev's Gauntlet change and the Gilded Arrow change, I think you'll see Hunters go a lot of Death's Toll. I think it'll make their laning phase feel a lot better. And I think they'll go Death's Embrace in the late game, so they have a lot more healing. It's also buffed because I believe it's a percentage of your max HP. And since everybody's health got buffed in 9.5 anyways, you're going to be getting more healing off the Death's Embrace. So I would say if you're an ADC player and Dev Gauntlets don't feel good to you in this new update, I would try going Death's Toll into Death's Embrace, and instead of going Dev Gloves, try going Atalana's or Aussies somewhere in your build, and then you'll kind of have 2 lifesteal items between the Embrace late game and the Aussie or the Atalana's. I'm pretty skeptical of this change. I'm not really in favor of it, but we'll see how it plays out. And then I believe last for the items is Deathbringer. Decrease critical damage increase from 30 to 25%. And then on the, that's just the same for each version of it. And then decrease the damage output debuff from 15 to 10%. I love this change on every single version of it. I don't love that it happened while Spectral also got nerfed. I wish they only did one of them, and I think the Deathbringer one is by far better. I think this is also a problem not only for the tanks who have Spectral, but also for assassins and for, you know, if a mage or an ADC gets hit by it. It's just a really, really strong effect. And, I mean, if you think of, like, a support having to buy Horrific and then get in range of a carry and then use a relic to Horrific them to decrease their output, whereas a hunter can just have Envenom Deathbringer and do it to everybody they crit. It's just clearly a strong mechanic. Tweaking it a little bit is good, and like tweaking the crit damage bonus is good. I honestly wonder if between this change alone and the Spectral change, if hunters won't go towards a more pen-based build, a more like Kin style build. Kin's is of course really good just because everybody's base HP went up, you know, same sort of logic as other items and effects, but the build is just cheaper. It's going to get online quicker. Kin's is really strong. I'm just a little skeptical of how hunters will feel. I think they'll still be very, very good, but I think it might make the game a little bit clunkier because not having crit might make the game just harder to end, right? It might be harder to do FG. It might be harder to kill tanks. Actually, not really harder to kill tanks. Kin's build will farm tanks probably just as hard as the crit build. So we'll see. Overall, I would say the item changes are just a bit too much. I think hunters have been nerfed too hard. I do think they needed nerfs, but I don't think the Dev Gauntlet nerf needed to happen, and I don't think Spectral needed to be this extreme. I think going midway on those items would have been fine. I think going 35% here and the Deathbringer nerf and maybe going to 25% on Dev Gloves, I think just a slightly less severe change would have been good. This to me seems like a lot. I'll see how it plays out. Hunters, in my opinion, are clearly the best class in the game. I don't even think it's close. So yeah, we'll see. Anyways, Gods, Kleedna, everybody hates this character. They complain about her all the time. Banshee's Wail, decreased base damage on the first 2 hits and on the final hit. So now her total damage goes from 420, that's lit, to 400. Just 20 damage, nothing crazy. Just a small tweak. And then Flickering Visions, that's her 2. Goes from 310 damage to 290. So 40 less base damage from Cleo. It's just a slight adjustment. It's not going to make or break the character. If you think she's good, she's still going to be good. If you think she's bad, then you're still going to think she's bad. Is what it is. Not really that crazy. Most of this patch is all the Deathbringer change, the Dev Gauntlet change, and the Spectral change. And then the big thing is Glad Shield. I think between all of this alone, you might see warriors start to get played a bit more. I think you're going to see them in the jungle. I think you might see them... Yeah, you'll see them in the jungle. You might see them, you know, just kind of polluting your games for a little bit while people figure out how good Glad Shield is. I don't think we're going to be in a warrior meta or a tank meta, but I am very skeptical that hunters were nerfed a bit too hard. If you're a hunter player and games feel tough to you with the old build, just try to go Kins or some other builds and see how that feels. I think if people go items like Glad Shield and they rush a little bit of early physical defense, I think if you get an early pen item and you get an early Kins, you will farm them. So that's what I'd be on the lookout for. But anyways, that is all of the 9.5 bonus, and I'm out. Ugh, so much talking, guys. So much talking. Any cues? Any cues here? Any cues here when I turn the camera on? I'm burning up. Burning up. I think Breastplate is lame and Spectral is lame. This for YouTube, yeah. I think the Breastplate nerf isn't lame, because I think that helps everybody, right? Like, that's going to help the carry rules, too. Like, a mage randomly building, like, Breastplate or whatever. Like, imagine if we do go to, like, a warrior jungle meta, theoretically. Like, if a mage is getting dove by multiple warriors, isn't it kind of nice to have Breastplate be good? Like, that's their defense item of choice. It can help them deal with the dive a lot more. So I actually think the Breastplate change is really good. The change I have a problem with is the dev one. I think it's too much. And I just hate Spectral as a whole. I'm a Spectral hater, personally. But I've always been a Spectral hater. Even when Spectral was like, whatever it was, like 60% reduction, I don't like the item. I don't think it's healthy for the game. I view it very similarly to how you'd view like thorns or something. Like at the time it was like a necessary mechanic, but I don't think it's one that's healthy for the game. I think this type of change is what's good. Like having Deathbringer have less bonus crit damage, I think helps the crit build a lot in terms of balancing it. Crit just constantly goes back and forth between 2 OP, not good enough, 2 OP, not good enough. Like it always goes back and forth. I don't think Breastplate is ever bought on a healthy character. I don't think that is true at all. I think if you're saying that, you're just arguing every single frontliner or every single like mage, bruiser mage or whatever is an unhealthy character. I think you're talking about like half the game. So I definitely do not agree. I don't think you can do Breastplate on mids anymore. Delays your damage too hard and you can't clear anything. I don't think you should do it second Moswell. I don't think that's when you need it. I think you could do it later. But also I think people are kind of building like noobs. Like I think Karen's coin is a really bad first item. Like really bad. I think people should be going like a higher power item. Like Warlocks is fine too, but I think going something like Doom Orb into like Obshard, I think that's a significantly better build. I think Obshard is such a better item than Coin. It's not even close. Like higher power, the proc is good, it's cheaper. Or it's not cheaper than Coin, but it's just more power and more pen. You have to go Sands, Pennant, Divine, E-Staff, Reaver. That's fine. I think Reaver for sure. Obshard is definitely just a good item, though. It definitely does a lot to carries, like a lot, because everybody's base like magic stats were just buffed, right? Like all their base, like these base magic procs, they were buffed everywhere. Maybe it's just mids being bad. Yeah, I think it's more that. I think mids are not very good right now. I personally think that mages should have been buffed by 5 power on their starter items or something like that. They just need help on the early clear. The red buff helps them a little bit, like not getting pounded by red when you first go to clear it, but I really think they're underwhelming in the early game. I think they need a little bit of help with wave clear. They get like once they get their first item, they're good, like they're chilling. But I really think the early game is so slow for them. It feels a little bit rough. Slower than other classes, I would argue. Old Rod is just like it's just a mandatory item. I don't think that's a good item to have in the game. I think mandatory items in general are just bad. Mids have so many mandatory items though, it didn't change anything. Rod was just replaced with Reaver. That's not true. There's been plenty of metas. Like you're saying that now, but there's been plenty of metas where Reaver has not been a mandatory item. Reaver will always be good, but it definitely has not been mandatory.